I don't know, it happens between Sunday morning and Monday evening. Perhaps this yoga class is going along or something.
All right, well,
But that's right.
we are recording now. So, yeah, hi.
Hi.
I sent Walsh a request to unmute, but it's not really gonna matter because I guess she doesn't need to speak. But,
Unless she needs to speak.
yeah, I wasn't gonna share the screen anyway.
Yeah, Megadodes.
In theory, Walsh can be there in the corner. No problem.
Competition.
No, it's Walsh. So yeah, it was November or so last time we touched on any of this stuff, and there were 3 areas left to kind of look at: the Americas, Africa, Australia, 3 A's. So that's kind of, I figured that's what we'll do. It'll be Americas, it'll be Africa, and then next time, then finish with Australia, right?
And they all start with A and end with A too. Well, except the S.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so this is lightweight stuff tonight. This isn't heavy doctrine. But particularly no, not particularly, with all of them, I felt like I found interesting little stories that I'd never heard before that maybe you'll find interesting too. And so I didn't do much pictures because there's not much pictures. It's not like the Romans or the Greeks where they have all these animations of Zeus and everything like that. It's just not there. So it's going to be heavy on the text side tonight because all text, but hopefully the quality of the stories make up for it. So we'll see how that is. And that we're also trying this new machine, so hopefully it cooperates nicely. So I start just with showing this one thing. So you get the idea here that people have been around for a long time, drawing in caves for a long time. And yeah, it just kind of gives you some sort of idea of the stretch of history. They're giving you a range, 35,000 to 13,000 years. So that's 22,000 years of this kind of stuff happening. And we get so upset when a few years passes and we don't get our politician in office, or whatever happens to happen fast enough. No, it's
Oh,
like,
you mean the pandemic ends?
yeah, things like that. Oh yeah, a year or two that. Well, World War II was, basically 6 years, 39 to 45, and that seemed like a big deal. You start looking at sweeps of time like this, and you go, 6 years is nothing. So it just kind of gives you an idea that these ancient civilizations were around for a long time. So with that, that's kind of a jumping point. Let's get a little further. So just some general things here. Walsh out a little bit. Hope you can hear us, Walsh. So this is someone who wrote an article basically talking about the misconceptions about Native American spirituality, because you'll see here, religion describes a division between the supernatural, which is ruled by one or multiple deities. Native American spirituality, it's not religion, it's spirituality, does not separate the two concepts in any real way. The spiritual or supernatural world is the same thing as the real world. Every supposed division is completely permeable, and people can access everything spiritual just as easily as they can wade in the river, or feel the sun on their skin. Think about this in terms of the ancient church. Is the supernatural and spiritual the same thing? Like they're saying here? Yes and no. I mean, if you look at, Moses and the Egyptians, they certainly lived in a world where supernatural and spiritual was very real and present for them here and out there too. So the idea of Native American spirituality to me ties into these ancient church ideas where the spiritual world is very present and very real. You want to read the next one?
I would.
Good.
There also exists a general sense of connection and oneness among a particular tribe of Native American people. The Lakota term Mitakuye Oyasin means that, I'm a linguist, means that all are related or all beings are relations of each other. This explains the belief that spirit exists in everything or that everything is connected in some way. Misunderstandings about the purpose behind the word, especially in non-native and non-Lakota communities, carry quite a bit of conflict. Still, the idea that all people and things are part of a whole and should respect and honor each other is not damaging in any way.
Yeah. You got some?
No, just, I've heard the term Lakota, that's all.
Right.
Honestly.
So a concept that's growing to the new church is about this whole the sense of oneness. We're all connected. So yeah. Go ahead.
So where would the Lakota tribe?
Yeah, I was wondering that too, actually, where geographically, do you know,
Uh,
the Dakotas?
I don't know.
No concepts of unattainability or inaccessibility seem to exist for many Native American belief systems. Everything exists in relation to everything else. This concept leads to the belief that tribal people are one with nature or similar ideas. Although phrases like that are often used in New Age philosophies, it does at its core also pertain to this idea of the spiritual existing firmly in the realm of tangible reality.
You know, we've seen this idea of one with nature in other cultures before, you know, so it's the more you dig around, it's like it's the same thing over and over again. They just use different stories to teach this, right?
Today, there are 573 recognized Native American tribes, according to both federal and state governments in the United States. While, of course, they do not now exist as completely separate and divided groups, and the people who belong to those tribes live anywhere they want, they still do carry some rather distinct religious beliefs and practices through the generation. Are they all different? Nah.
Yeah. So I guess it's trimming around the edges, you know, they're similar and yet different, but I'm curious when I do the research on Australian Aboriginal cultures, how many I'm going to find there, 573 in the US versus how many different
Language groups here,
Yeah, I think there's going to be more.
yeah.
More in Australia.
I think Australia's going to have more.
There's a lot of small,
Yeah.
very small groups.
So
Oh, yeah, because more spread out.
we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see in a few weeks, but yeah, all right. So that's some generalities. You want to just pick a paragraph if you want.
Other beliefs. Oh, well, afterlife. Yes, the body will journey on to another realm or spirit
What
world.
about the first one?
He said pick anyone,
I'll pick anyone.
where it would live
All
another
right.
type of life, much as it did when it was within a human body here on earth. Planting and harvesting, I can do them all.
Go for it.
Monotheistic. The idea of a singular great spirit emerges in many different tribes, however. The Lakota or Sioux and Dakota tribes call this Wakantanka. Wakantanka. The concept itself is diverse as other cultures' concepts of what a god or goddess is. Wakantanka loosely means great or sacred mystery and encompasses a belief in spirits that interact with the world in various ways. Planting and harvesting, celebrations like the Green Corn Festivals mattered a lot. These particular ceremonies had to do with picking corn at the end of the growing season and waiting until it was ready to be used as food. These ceremonies were done by the Cherokee, Iroquois, Creek, and other Native American nations. They included ritual cleansing, dancing, feasts, various types of ceremonies, and practices both serene and a lot of fun.
So on the last one, planting and harvesting, we saw a lot of examples in other cultures where those things were done to please the gods. You know, we're going to give this stuff so they'll be happy, they'll like us, and they'll give us stuff. And I couldn't find anything that suggested that was the motivation for the Native Americans. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. It's on some level, like, oh, we're going to make the gods happy. So these things are important. It could also be something along the lines of just gratitude, where if we believe we are one with nature, you know, well, when we chop this tree down, we're gonna, you know, say thanks, tree, for giving your life, kind of thing. I have heard stories of that kind of thing. I just couldn't find it for this class, but I have heard them before. So, but I found it interesting that monotheism was a common thing. You know, a singular great spirit. And they do, however, seem to buy into kind of the big guy and then some others as well.
Hierarchy.
Yes, yes. So last one in this series, you can have one
Okay.
if you want.
Smudging is the act of burning certain herbs or incense so they produce a lot of smoke and using that smoke to cleanse the person, object, or place. It is done in many pagan religions to release negativity or bad spirits from a location. The Catholic and Episcopal churches use censers with smoking incense during Mass for the same purposes. So Native Americans from various tribes use smudging in much the same way. So when we
The Aboriginals have the smoking ceremonies and
they did that down on
down on the tennis
Yeah.
court.
down on the tennis court, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
When Leanne brought a bunch of kids over from Mormon for her trip,
Yeah.
they
Welcome
stayed.
to country.
There were about 20 of them camped on the floor in here, and we
Oh,
had
wow.
mattresses coming everywhere, and we had this, and then they brought the elders in, and we had a smoking ceremony. and-
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
I didn't realize that was Aboriginals, but I'm definitely aware of
You haven't
Native
heard of
Americans.
an
Yeah,
Aboriginal
smoking.
smoking ceremony
Mm.
ever? Really?
Mm.
Even when you went out to Uluru and stuff?
No,
Hmm.
I mean, only, yeah, no, I don't.
They burn gun leaves and things.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean,
Makes sense.
so what's interesting to me is like I'm familiar with Native American smudging, and I just hadn't really made the connection that this author did about the Catholic and Episcopal churches using censers. I'm like,
right.
oh yeah, that makes sense, right? You know,
Yeah.
where does that come from? Oh yeah, ancient church type stuff,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's
Have you
right.
been to Catholic church where they do that?
I think the Greek Orthodox.
And they
churches.
have this, it swings and
Yeah.
this incense
It's
coming
very,
up and
very
down the
ritualistic.
aisle. Oh, yeah.
You walk around, listen to a thing 3 or 4 times.
Isn't
and-
that from Cliff's Dance?
Smell
I
it.
know I've experienced it. I can't remember where.
Right, yeah, I can't place it either, but I feel like I'm a little bit familiar with it now.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
one of the more interesting things I came across years ago on smudging was this guy who swore that he could sense spirits in a room, and it drove him nuts because kind of a germaphobe going in there and seeing with black light all the germs on the bedding and stuff like that, and this guy would go into a hotel room and he's going, oh man, this place isn't very good. And so he says he would take smudging sticks with him and he would smoke out his hotel rooms. Don't know how the smoke alarm didn't go off, but he would go in there and do these Native American ceremonies to clear the place out of evil spirits before you could spend the night there.
Hmm.
It's just like, wow, okay. Very practical in his application of it. It has made me think twice about some of the places I've stayed. Hooters Hotel and Casino in Vegas.
Sure.
Carolyn will tell you some stories about
People in hotels.
people in hotels and
Oh,
in beds. She says the Chinese are the worst, actually.
Oh, in
That's
what
what she-
regard?
Pardon?
In what regard?
Smoking.
Oh, well, the bed's probably get full of
Wow.
creepy crawlies after they go.
Okay, interesting.
Mm.
What about the Jewish church? They had incense. Is that the same sort of thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're using different,
Material.
Yeah,
Resin
right.
or something, yeah.
but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I thought that was interesting.
It's so cool, all the things that come back to one source.
Oh, this I threw in there for fun because I couldn't believe it, right? I found this article about these archaeologists who had found various skeletons in the US that were in the kind of range of the 9,000 to 15,000 year old time frame. And these scientists are being driven nuts by the Native Americans because the Native Americans have all these rules protecting ancient burials, and they're saying, hey, you can't get DNA samples on this stuff because we get to rebury it, even though they haven't done enough work on it to figure out who it actually belongs to. They kind of fight over as to who gets to rebury it. And so I got this quote from this one Indian fellow, and he says,
Indian as a Native American?
yeah,
Okay.
he says, we never ask science to make a determination as to our origins, says Sebastian Lebeau, repatriation officer for the Cheyenne River Sioux, a Lakota tribe based in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. We know where we came from. We are the descendants of the Buffalo people. They came from inside the earth after supernatural spirits prepared this world for humankind to live here.
Oh.
If non-Indians choose to believe they evolved from an ape, so be it. I have yet to come across 5 Lakotas who believe in science and evolution. So,
Interesting.
yeah, I was like, really, I hadn't thought of that in terms of
Yeah.
literalists and that kind of stuff. Oh, it's almost, well, it is very ancient church in the sense that they take the story that was meant to be spiritual tale and turn it into literal fact. I've had some guys in the last few days on my YouTube channel commenting about my creation story video and saying how rubbish it is because it's literally true. Ugh. So yeah, I didn't expect that to find that here. So, so to do this section, I kind of realized that there are probably some new church people who have done some research on this before. So I put up my smoke signals on Cyber Council and said, hey, does anybody,
Smoke signals, cyber council.
yeah,
That's an oxymoron.
yeah. So has anybody got any leads for me on this? And I got a couple leads, but I also got a couple stories. And this one is from the Reverend Willard Heinrichs, who I don't know has ever been here.
Who?
Willard Heinrichs.
Well, yeah, he came.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, this is from him. This is his email to us, and he tells a little story. So I think it's your turn.
No,
All right.
isn't it your turn?
Why
No,
don't
he
you-
was asked.
You did. I knew that.
He's talking all the time.
So I know. Okay, got it.
For a number of years, I met with a man partially reared by the Potawatomi tribe after his missionary parents had died. Growing up with them and in later life, he investigated a number of Native American religions and their practices, eventually learning and practicing how to travel in the spirit and divine for lost people, etc. For example, he demonstrated to me that how he could divine for water and for gold, and did so before my eyes.
How cool is that?
He also became a master of numerous external Native American crafts, demonstrating the same to students at the University of Oregon for a number of years. He became something of an adjunct member of the Grand Medicine Lodge, and to the end of his life maintained an ongoing written correspondence with various chiefs, shaman, and elders in a number of tribes across the country.
One damp evening in a town in Nebraska, a piece of paper stuck to the sole of his shoe. He pulled it off and it said, "Heaven and Hell," at the top. He found the book in a library and this launched him into a conversion to the new church and a love of the heavenly doctrine for the rest of his days on earth.
That's pretty random.
Is this Willard Heinrichs we're talking about?
Well,
No,
he's
it's
referring
somebody
to a
he
friend.
knew,
Yeah,
Somebody he knew.
Correct.
an acquaintance.
yeah.
In his correspondence with his many Native American contacts, he would pose various questions to them. When I, on quarterly visits, visited with him in his log cabin, sitting in front of a roaring fire, talking doctrine and his experiences with Native American religion and culture, he would regularly pull letters off of the shelf and read portions of their contents to me. In this context, he recurred to one of the questions that he had posed. When your people thought of the Great Spirit, known by various names in various tribes, what picture did they have in their minds of him? The common response, he said, was, "He is a man who looks like the sun."
The follow-on question that my friend asked them was, when the white missionaries came along to your people, did your ancestors tell them of this image of the Great Spirit that is so like what they might find in their Bible, in their Bible in relation to Jesus Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration? Their response to this follow-up probe was that the missionaries never asked such things of them. The missionaries were generally so intent on evangelizing their faith that they had little, if any, interest in investigating what Native American peoples may have already believed.
That Willard put in there. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
So
oh yeah, so there's some more.
it was the same in regard to the significance that they placed in various animals, birds, geological features, etc. His context allowed as how generally the real significance of these things and their relation to the Great Spirit and to the spirit of man was known only to a few, to shaman and perhaps some of the elders. Most of the folks using our terms were only into the externals of their religion and into the worship practices. Again, in our terms, it would seem that by the time the Europeans came to America, mostly what remained was an external and essentially blind idolatry so common at the end of the ancient church elsewhere.
What did I say? History repeating itself?
Mhm.
Again and again.
He would have been in high demand for his divining gold.
I mean,
Water.
The ability to communicate telepathically was quite common amongst the Aboriginals.
Mm.
They go walk about, and the elders who stayed put would be able to know where they were just by telepathy.
my wife can't even find me in the house.
That's because you're hiding. Yeah. Good at that.
Exactly, I'm good.
But I should still be able to sense.
Yes. So anyway, I thought that was kind of cool. The guy finds heaven and hell on a piece of
Yeah.
paper on his foot. What's this all about?
And then follows it up. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, and it's like, there was another one of these that came to Cyber Council. I didn't include in the presentation because I thought the story wasn't quite complete enough. But basically, there's a Native American who found the facts and says, "This is what we believe in your terms, basically. He's like, this expresses our beliefs.
Hmm.
So, yeah, yeah,
White man lingo.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Right, okay. Yeah, keep on checking out. So this one was one of the leads I got, and this was out of the publication New Philosophy, which is part of the Swedenborg Foundation, I believe, back in the States. So this is from a 1972 edition of
New philosophy.
New Philosophy.
Isn't it a Brenathan thing? I thought it was.
You could be right. I wouldn't quote me on that.
Okay, my turn.
Sure.
Northwest Coast mythology. I will recount the story as it was told me by Kenneth Harris, the present head of the fireweed killer whale clan among the Gits and a branch of the whatever.
No.
Four hunters, Mr. Harris told me, were out after a beaver, but they were having no luck. It was suspected that the wife of one of them must be deceiving him because the animals were very sensitive to adultery and do not come to the trap of a cuckold. Finally, the leader of the four fell through the top of a beaver dam into the house beneath and could not be rescued. They were sure that this was due to the performing of a forbidden act, so they returned secretly to the village.
They
Interesting.
didn't get their beaver.
Right.
The beaver got
Yeah,
them.
right.
I mean, so, I mean, where my mind goes is the Adam and Eve story, right? You know, the animal, the serpent is sensitive to the deception, I guess, maybe. And, but more than that is just that there's a deception happening there, and that it's the wife who's the adulteress. You know, she's the one going wrong, just as Eve goes wrong there. So, but at the same time, it's like, wait a second, the guy's been out hunting, we didn't find anything. Must be one of the wives.
Wait. Wife must be deceiving him.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's why we can't find
Very
anything.
sensitive to adultery.
That's clearly some male logic at hand.
Yeah.
Would there be a lot of these sort of stories around or what?
Presumably for each different
I can imagine.
area. Now, this story keeps on going, so I'm just giving Murray a chance to catch up. Did you get it?
Yeah.
So there's plenty more to this. They don't finish there. There, they discovered his wife in the act of adultery. The man from a village across the river, the son of its chief.
So the wife of the guy who got trapped, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
When the couple fell asleep, they crept up beside them and cut off his
Oh,
head.
well, yeah.
Then they hung it over the gable of the house.
Wow.
The people of the village across the river, when the prince was not to be discovered there until the next morning, grew suspicious. The chief sent a slave across the frozen river to reconnoiter under the pretense of begging fire. So,
Begging fire. Like,
right,
it's cold. They want fire.
Yep.
Got it.
we need some fire, and our
Use
prince
fire.
is missing. Do you perhaps know where it is?
Way. Oh, look, there's his head.
Right.
When the slave had confirmed the execution of the prince, the village across the river raided the village of the four brothers and destroyed it. The only people who escaped were a young girl of noble lineage, Skawa, and her mother. The mother went in search of a husband for Skawa, somebody who would be able to avenge the destruction of her people. All the animals of the forest presented themselves in their human forms because all animals can appear as human beings, but they were rejected. Finally, a god identified as the rays of the sun, the moon spirit, or the son of the sun god, or sky god in other traditions, descended and offered himself. After he had proved his power, he was accepted, and taking the daughter under his arm, he carried her away to heaven. There she gave birth to 4 sons who were trained in the arts of life. And it goes on.
Yeah.
When these demigods were set down upon the earth, they built the town of Temlaham according to divine specifications. The very house plans were divinely ordained. This was the first appearance on earth of the house of painted boards, with the floor excavated in 2 tiers and the exterior house post in front. When the town of Temlaham was completed, it was inhabited by the souls of the dead, restored to life by the Creator. All this was before the Great Flood.
Wow, town of dead people. Restored dead people.
Yeah, but are you getting that there's some sort of like it's a paradise? You know, this is divinely ordained. I mean, it's painted boards. Well, that's got to be exotic, right? So I think it was Mesopotamia that had a similar type of a paradisical town that people could go to in the ancient times, right? So, all right, well,
The
continue.
fact that there's even mention of a flood.
Yes, well, that's right.
Yeah.
We're getting there. So,
Right.
next up.
God also warned his grandchildren of the flood and instructed that they build their ark to a specific dimension on which their descendants will survive the flood. Gil asked for first totem pole, a gift from their grandfather, was to be the instrument of survival. The glass was a small pear-shaped pole. The instructions were the pole be planted in front of the Haglote's dark. Haglote was Mr. Harris's titular ancestor. This was done, and to everyone's amazement, the glass grew until it pierced the sky. This is common knowledge to other all the other clans and tribes.
Of course, everybody knows this. Don't know why I'm even bothering saying it.
When the flood did come, the people of Temlahan remembered the warning and the instructions for survival. The Gilhast was cut down into 3 sections. The Da'ak, which was already built to specifications, was moored to the Gilcast. Thus, the people of Temlahem were divided into 3 groups. The water that washed the face of the earth subsided, and the Da'ak came to rest once again.
So these docks sounded like to me like they were ships. I mean, they were houses that floated. So they had them kind of in the ground with the pole in front, but painted boards and all of everything. So okay, we got this, and then the gods are going to give us the totem pole that's going to pierce the sky. We're going to cut it up, and we're going to moor ourselves to these. But notice some themes here beyond, well, the obvious one, the flood. There's divine instructions on how to build all this stuff. We're going to save these people who have been, who are still good, right? Because that tribe was wiped out by the evil people across the river. So we're going to save it. And these people are really good. They're demigods. So not just ordinary schmoes. And yeah, God's going to save them. So yeah, we've got some familiar themes here as far as I can tell. Is that you or me?
Owen.
Owen?
One group came to rest near the site of Temlahan, near Kisbiok. one on the coast, and the third one was not accounted for. Wherever the people of Tamlahan settled, they erected the gilha, as in loving memory of their origin and the assistance of God in their survival. It may be seen from Mr. Harris's account part of a story of epic length that Temlahan is a holy city, though in what must have been the earliest formulation of this idea, that of the holy village. Or holy city.
Right. Yeah, so it's, it's their kind of Garden of Eden almost that they're having here, but it's once again like another flood story. And what I find fascinating about it is, if you remember, like one of the slides we showed a few times last year was how you had like the ancient church and the ancient language forming in the area that's now modern Turkey, and that this Indo-European language spread east and west, and that as it spread, that's how we find these stories kind of, going with the language. And so it kind of made sense that you'd say, oh, well, Egypt has these stories and Greece has some of these stories, because, well, it came from a very common area. And by the time we stretched out to Japan, the connections were much more tenuous, right? It'd gone through enough stretching that the connections were looser. But here we have this kind of stuff, which is a flood account, and it's really hard to make the case that people from ancient Turkey, in Asia Minor, ended up in North America and are inspiring flood stories over there. Because this is Pacific Northwest. This is like, Oregon and Washington State area is where this comes from. So it's a long, long way from over there, which personally I like that, in the sense that, okay, you have God seeding different cultures and they're ending up with these same kind of things. And just wait, there's more. Because now we're going to jump into the Mayans.
Or central.
Yeah, more central, but I think we got into South America as well. And so again, one of the leads I was given was to a paper written by Dylan Odner, who is a teacher at the Academy High School.
Two finger ones.
I know.
Sorry, that's weird.
He still is a real person though.
Yeah, right.
So
Current?
yeah, he's currently there. And this was, as best that I could figure, I think it was written about 5 years ago. And I yanked it out of New Church Life, I believe. And he did, he was doing some academic study for another university. And he came across this thing in the Mayan culture, a document called the Pupol Vuh. And he compares that to things in the writings about the ancient word. Basically, this Mayan text is referring to an ancient word and has tales from it, and seeing the similarities in the kind of ancient church, the way the writings talk of it. I've pulled out an excerpt of some slides here for us to look at. You'll see a number of places where there's like a name in parentheses. Well, that's the translator. So you'll see blah, 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 Tedlock 35. Well, Tedlock's the translator of this Mayan text. And there'll be a few of those translator notes in there that I didn't feel like it was worth taking them out. So that's fine. I think this is my slide. This is from the writings, this first little bit. I have been informed by the men of the most ancient church, whereas so heavenly a character that they conversed with angels, and they had the power of holding such conversation by means of correspondences. And this ability to communicate openly with the heavens is directly echoed in the Mayan Pupol Vuh, in which the people of the Golden Age are described as anthropomorphic wooden mannequins. The first four
I was in our crossword puzzle the other day. Anthropomorphic. I'm like, what?
Anthropomorphic wooden.
It means ascribing
Animal-
human
Characters. to
characteristics to animals.
In this case, human characteristics to wooden mannequins.
Right.
Mm.
vice versa.
The first four humans, the first four earthly beings who were truly articulate when they moved their feet and hands, their faces and mouths, and who could speak the very language of the gods, could also see everything under the sky and on earth.
Both texts describe the antediluvian peoples of the earth being in direct communication with another world, but the similarities do not end there.
So just so we're clear, both texts being the writings and this Pupol
Okay. On a more symbolic level, the ability of the people of the Mayan Golden Age to see everything under the sky and on earth seems to correlate strongly with Swedenborg's description of the people of the most ancient church. When they looked upon any of the objects of this world, they not only thought of them naturally, but also spiritually, thus in conjunction with the angels of heaven. What is more, in both cases, this perfect vision seems to be the source of their direct communication with the heavens.
So there's quoting from his writings. And Ralph.
And the Pupol Vuh, the fall of man seems to be caused by a hubristic lack of humility. This was the peopling of the face of the earth. They came into being, they multiplied, they had daughters, they had sons. These mannequins, wood carvings, but there was nothing in their hearts and nothing in their minds, no memory of their mason and builder. They just went and walked wherever they wanted. Now they did not remember the heart of sky, and so they fell.
Right. So I guess the big commonality there is, right, first few people and they fall, right? Can't keep it together for very long.
Students of comparative mythology will not be surprised that the Pupol Vuh also contains a mythical deluge. And so they accomplished nothing before their maker, model who gave them birth and gave them heart. The mannequins, wood carvings were killed when the heart of the sky devised a flood for them. They're using references which are virtually indistinguishable from the biblical covenant of the rainbow after the flood. The sky earth was already there, but the face of the sun moon was clouded over. Even so, it is said that his light provided a sign for the people who were flooded.
I don't think we've ever had any sort of tie in there between a light provided as a sign for the other cultures. So it's a little different. But of course, it's God who's killing them. I devised a flood for them. So we don't. So again, one of the YouTube comments that came up lately was something like, how do you explain the wrath of God being like, sort of the symbolic kind of reading of scripture? It's like, well, how do you see the wrath of God trying to make it that what I'm saying about God being all loving can't be true because he's wrathful? And even in the Mayans, you don't get a more clear understanding. Everything we still have to have that appearance that God is going to get us. Apparently, there's a common denominator in humanity that we need that kind of
Threat?
threat. Yeah, exactly. Threat of force in order to behave. watch out, better behavior, God's gonna get you. You,
It is clear from both texts that the people of the Silver Age were not simply the survivors of the flood. Instead, we are given a fascinating description of how the divine changed humanity's nature, perhaps even on a neurological level. It is therefore not the flood, but the alteration of the human mind that began the Silver Age, which Swedenborg calls the ancient church, to distinguish it from the most ancient church that preceded it. In the Pupol Vuh, this alteration has an almost surgical nature. Let it be this way. Now we'll take them apart just a little. That's what we need. What we found out isn't good. Their deeds will become equal to ours just because their knowledge reaches so far.
yeah. And again, that whole fear of humanity reaching to be godlike is in play. Get that in the Bible as well, but we don't have quite the whole, we're gonna open up your skull requirement, but
Not quite.
not quite.
When they changed the nature of their works, their designs, it was enough that the eyes be marred by the heart of the sky. They were blinded as the face of a mirror is breathed upon. Tedlock 148. Here, the imagery of how a micro is
Mirror.
a mirror, how a mirror is breathed upon is not of key importance for Swedenborg. Describes the people of the most ancient church receiving direct revelation and guidance from God through the mirror of nature. And Rose, is that one of Jonathan Rose? Or?
Yeah, I presume so. So, yeah, it's, again, very similar in the sense that you have the use of correspondences known and used by ancient culture, both in the Middle Eastern world and in the ancient American culture. So I think that's what they're going there with the mirror being breathed upon. After the flood, however, this direct mirror to heaven was too dangerous, and so God saved the human race by making intellect separable from the will. From the perspective of a structuralist, the concepts of a mirror breathed upon and intellect separable from the will follow the same directionality. What was once fused is now separate, like the cutting of the collective umbilical cord.
The concept of an ancient word cannot be found anywhere within the Christian Bible, and yet it is placed in the very first line of the Pupol Vuh. This is the beginning of the ancient word, here in this place called Quiche. Here we shall inscribe, we shall implant the ancient word, the potential source for everything done in the citadel of Quiche, in the nation of the Quiche people.
Quiche?
Amen.
Quiche?
That's awesome.
Tedlock makes an explicit connection between the power of this ancient word and the power that was previously granted to the Golden Age. When everything they saw was clear to them, the Lords were recovering the vision of the first four humans who at first saw everything under the sky perfectly. That would mean that the Pupol Vuh made it possible once again to sight four sides, the four corners in the sky and on earth.
All right, well, I'll stop there for a second. So that's the end of that series. So, I mean, the idea that there's an ancient word, is pretty cool, and that they're clear about it, and it's an ancient text that tells them about times before the flood. oh yeah, we used to understand all this stuff quite clearly. We lost it. Oh, and by the way, here's what it all was all about. And I know people don't like the fact that the scripture has deeper meaning because it feels to them like God's lying to them. He's not being straight with me. But, I get the idea of protecting people from their own worst inclinations. It's like, okay, here are these stories, and you can get on a basic level, behave, right? Get that basic lesson, but we're gonna hide some of the deeper things here so that you can't see everything perfectly unless you're really after it. And I'm sure I did a newsletter on this some time ago about God loving evil people too. And it's just one of those things that I keep coming back to about, just feels that God, the New Church idea that God protects evil people from themselves at the cost of good people. Like he's willing to prevent good people from elevating higher in order to prevent the evil people from going lower. And that's what I get with this kind of stuff is everything they said was clear to them when they have this key and they understand it rightly. And something that we see both here in the Mayans and in the Bible. So just a few slides left about the Mayan afterlife.
Afterlife, the Mayan afterlife was similar to the Mesopotamian in that it was a dark and dreary place, but the Maya imagined an even worse fate where one was constantly under the threat of attack or deception by the demon lords who inhabited the underworld, Zalaba or Metnal. Dread of the journey through the Zalaba was such a potent cultural force that the Maya are only known ancient culture to honor a goddess of suicide, Luxton, because the suicides were thought to bypass the Zalbar and go straight to paradise, as those who died in childbirth or in battle.
Wow.
Oh,
Three groups you don't normally see put together:
no.
suicides, warriors, and kids who die. Not normally put together.
Wait,
I took
That's
that.
sort of
I
large.
thought that was the mothers.
Oh,
Mothers and
okay, yeah, all right. My bad.
Suicide is a shortcut to paradise.
Right.
Yeah, when they're all
Yeah.
alive, they're extinct of themselves, right?
I think
Wow, that's
there's
cool.
teachings from Swedenborg that are about opposite.
As far as suicide is concerned,
Yeah.
you really wouldn't want to glorify suicide. would you?
No, but I do like this
Maybe
first
that's why
paragraph.
they're not, yeah.
Yeah, there's no man's around now because they all suicided.
Yeah.
It went straight to heaven.
Yeah, but the idea of constantly under attack or deception by the demon lords who inhabit the underworld, and that to me,
Ooh.
that
That's
feels
hell.
That's worse, a fate worse than, yeah.
and it's. But isn't that hell, right? You know,
Mhm.
if you love evil, that's where you end up with other people who are just like yourself, who's trying to deceive you and not be nice.
The Maya believed in the cyclical nature of life, that all things which seem to die simply are transformed, and considered human life just another part of the kind of pattern they saw all around them in nature. They felt death was a natural progression after life and feared the very unnatural possibility that the dead could return to haunt the living.
Mhm.
Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
It was possible that a person would hang on to life for any number of reasons, the chief being improper burial. And so ceremonies were performed to remember the dead and honor their spirit. This belief was also held by Mesopotamia, no, it's not that. Mesoamerican cultures other than the Maya, such as the Aztec and the Tarascan. In time, it developed into the holiday
Hmm.
known today as the Day of the Dead. El Dia was de los
De los
No.
Muertos.
Okay. In which people celebrate the lives of those who have passed on and remember their names.
Yeah, we see all in other cultures about.
So where is that in use
Day
today?
of the
or
Dead in
was it just
Day of the Dead is
Yeah,
still
yeah.
a thing.
It's a thing.
it's still a thing?
In Mexico.
Kind of like how Halloween's a thing,
Yeah.
but maybe I shouldn't compare it to that. I don't really know.
Maybe cocoa or something like that.
Yeah.
Coca, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
So
Let's see.
I just, I thought it was interesting that they would, they fear being haunted by somebody who doesn't get a proper burial. You know, you don't put me down right, well, I'm gonna come get you. That's why I'm hanging on. That was the end. So, I mean, you get this cyclical nature of life. We see that in other societies and cultures as well. And I think that's a ancient church kind of thing, where you have these time periods, and you can see it in the new church. You know, you have the most ancient church, the ancient church, the Jewish church, the Christian church, the new church. You know, it's all these cycles of something rising up out of nothing and then falling and leaving something behind to start the next, you know, cycle and run. And it is just part of life. Part of life.
But the new church not supposed to fall.
It's supposed to not fall, yeah. But even within these things, you see this pattern of growth and death and growth and death. It's a cycle of life. We just don't have the whole thing of if you screw it up, somebody's going to come back and haunt you. But I think we saw that in the Egyptian ones, wasn't it? The Egyptians, where they had the doorways into the tombs so people could give them gifts so that the guys don't come back and do them wrong. It's like, oh, these Helldens, they leave good gifts here. I'm gonna make sure they have lots of rain on their property. So, yeah. So anyway, I think that's good timing for us anyway. 8:33. So there you have it. Some stories that I'm guessing you've not heard before. About floods and creation in other cultures, and
Indians.
yeah, and it's
You're going to find them in these Australian Aborigines too.
I hope so.
Some of them you will, yeah.
I mean, I found it interesting about how hard it was to find this stuff outside of New Church scholarship, though. I mean, most of the stuff is written by other new churchmen that had done some work and was able to edit it down for our purposes. But I also was surprised to find some new church authors from, I think it was like the late 1800s, if I remember right, in New Church life, who didn't sound very new church. You know, these savages, da 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 da, you know, need to be reformed. There's no evidence that these people can be regenerated. Da, 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 you know, it's like, oh.
So what was the date of that publication?
It was like late 1800s in New Church life. So I was like, oh, so not everybody was on the.
So that would have been a commonly held view amongst.
Well, that's what the missionaries that went out, that's what was their basic approach, was these savages had to be saved, and they didn't have anything of value.
Yeah, but I hoped that the new church folk were different.
Right, and in my life in Matthew, there are plenty of new church people who like to trumpet the fact that there were new church abolitionists early on that cause, and they trumpet it as, okay, these people really, the doctor understood it, and they were really applying to life and seeing past the cultural acceptance of the day. And when I saw that about New Church people thinking Indians were not so great, thought, well, I guess not everybody was on the bandwagon of seeing people as people kind of thing. But then you had some of these other authors who, clearly did get it. And those ones, however, are more recent authors. So, yeah, not all was perfect in the history of the new church, shall we say. So, yeah, anyway, so there you have it. I will screen share if you're still there, Walsh. I'll stop the recording.